Summer is over and both campaigns are full speed ahead to Election Day.
67 days from now, we're going to win Pennsylvania. We're going to defeat Comrade Kamala Harris.
We are out here running like we are the underdog in this race because we know what we are fighting for.
Vice President Harris has entered her post-honeymoon campaign phase and is leading former President Trump in a number of state and national level polls. The election is going to come down to 7 battleground states which Trump had an edge in prior to President Biden stepping out of the race. But now, one by one, from Georgia to Michigan to Nevada, Kamala Harris has a narrow lead above Trump and even moved North Carolina to a toss-up. And in 1 week, both candidates will take the stage facing off for the first and possibly the only presidential debate this election cycle. Here to go on the record is Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science for Decision Desk HQ. Scott, it's so good to see you again. It's been a few weeks since we've chatted, so let's jump right into it. We know that former President Trump made a major admission this week, telling Fox News he has every right to interfere in a presidential election. While experts have called the claim disturbing, do you think we will see any response to his comments in polling, or will this just be another instance of Trump being Trump without losing support from his conservative base?
Yeah, this is exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be another comment that's going to be replaced by another comment that we're talking about, and during that time, we're not going to see any erosion from his base. Trump has effectively been running for president for almost 10 years now, or been president during that time, and voters are pretty desensitized to some of these more sensational comments he makes.
So moving on to Vice President Harris's campaign, she spent Labor Day in battleground Wisconsin and Pennsylvania campaigning on the economy. And this week, her campaign rolled out an ad hating former President Trump over the economy. We know Reuters Ipsos poll released last week showed Harris beginning to gain some ground on Trump with the economy. 43% of voters said they backed Trump's plan for the economy, while 40% said they backed Harris. Are voters buying her message on the economy, or is this poll an outlier?
No, we're seeing similar things with in regards to what voters think about her economic policies. She is at a slight disadvantage, not as much as Joe Biden was, but she is still behind Donald Trump in the eyes of voters in terms of who's best to handle the economy. She's only been running for about 6 weeks now, but we have a decent body of polls to work from. Some time to close that gap, but this is certainly solidified in voters' minds.
Yeah, it's interesting because we know that Republicans tend to lead on the issue of the economy, so something to look out for ahead of November. So like I said before, we know that Harris spent her time in Pennsylvania over the weekend, teaming up with President Biden, her boss, campaigning with union workers. The vice president made it clear that she needs their support to win the state, but we know that Trump has also been courting labor unions. Trump has been able to appeal to union workers in the past, particularly in 2016, but Scott, where does his support stand with the group now?
Look, he got a big get. He got the the Teamsters to speak at the RNC. We know he has broad cross section of blue collar appeal. You can kind of see that with some of these unions, obviously endorsing Harris, but acknowledging privately and sometimes publicly that there's a significant chunk of their base is going to vote for Donald Trump. This is interesting. We haven't seen a Republican battle another Democrat for the labor union base. I don't know, 100 years. This is certainly a change in the makeup for Republicans, and Donald Trump is going to get a significant portion of those voters, and they're going to be in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, where the union vote is going to be decisive to whoever wins.
Yeah, 3 of the biggest swing states this cycle. You want to move from the blue wall to the Sun Belt. New polling from Emerson College shows the Sun Belt states are up for grabs. Harris has tightened the gap with that Trump had built when President Biden was still in the race. The latest polling from Emerson College shows Vice President Harris is holding a narrow lead in Nevada and Georgia now. The Peach State, Georgia, seemed to be out of reach for Democrats this election cycle when Biden was at the top of the ticket. So with Harris at the top of the ticket, Scott, what do you think is behind the new momentum?
Well, I think it's two things. One is she is appealing a little bit more to the African American vote than Joe Biden was. It's slight, but it's in the crosstabs. And two is she's the new fresh candidate. As you know, Joe Biden surprised a lot of people, including me, squeaking out a victory in 2020 in Georgia. So we know there are enough Democratic voters in Georgia for a Democrat to win, and it's up to Harris to activate them. So that's why I think we're seeing it be competitive both in Nevada and Georgia.
Staying with the Sun Belt, another recent state that is now up for play is North Carolina, which we know Trump won in 2016 and 2020. The Cook Political Report now has the state as a toss-up. So if Harris is able to flip North Carolina, that would be a major blow, obviously, to Trump and Republicans. So, Scott, if you factor a blue win in the state of North Carolina for Harris, how much of an impact would it have on the Electoral College? And would she need what other major states would she need to claim victory? I know that Pennsylvania seems to be an essential one.
Yeah, no, if she's able to take North Carolina, which is a flip for her from what Trump won in 2020, it really opens the map up and makes it allows her to potentially lose a Pennsylvania or another blue wall state, in which if she loses North Carolina and loses Georgia, she's got to win all three. And so North Carolina is her being on the offensive and making it difficult for Donald Trump to repeat his 2020 map. That would really scramble some things if she continues to make that one competitive. You mentioned Cook made it a toss up. Our own DDHQ Hill forecast has had it at a toss up for about a week now, and I think that one's going to be closer as we get down get down to the wire here.
Yeah, North Carolina, very much a state to watch. We know that it has a highly contested governor's race there too, so we'll be keeping an eye on those two races in the state. So moving down to Florida, the Harris campaign launched their Reproductive Rights for All bus tour in Palm Beach, Florida on Tuesday, with the amendment to enshrine abortion rights into the Florida Constitution on the ballot in November. Do you think Democrats have a shot at gaining ground in the Sunshine State, or is this essentially a ploy to maybe get Republicans to spend more money in states like Florida and hinder them in other places on the map?
Look, it's good they're spending money there. It's good they're spending time, but it is not a state I would bet on for them to flip at the presidential level. I would not be surprised if that amendment passes, but Donald Trump still wins the state by 5-7, which would be an interesting cross section there. Florida is still a solidly Republican state. I think the Democrats are hoping the Republicans are going to spend some money there, and the Republicans are going to have to spend some money there if they want a shot at defeating that amendment. But at the presidential level and even at the Senate level, we haven't talked about that yet, but I imagine we will over the next couple months. It looks pretty solidly Republican.
Yeah, and one thing to note is that in the past, we know that Florida voters have voted for Republicans at the top of the ticket, like in 2020 with President Trump, but have voted for liberal ballot measures like increasing the minimum wage to $15. So we'll see how abortion, obviously a very different issue, plays there. So I want to move to foreign policy now. President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continue to be at odds over a ceasefire deal in the wake of the killing of Israeli-American hostage Hersh Goldberg Poland and 5 other Israeli hostages in Gaza. Republicans and Trump have blamed Biden and Harris for the situation. But Scott, will this ultimately play any role in the election?
Look, right now it is the economy all the way to the end. I mean, foreign policy does have, specifically the Israeli-Gaza issue has some specific interest among some segments of both parties. But the economy is really running it. If there's an escalation in that conflict or any sort of major development, I could see it taking over the news cycle. But by and large, it's the economy and immigration. This Israeli Israel-Palestine conflict has certainly been part of the polls and part of the issue matrix for President Biden and Trump earlier in the year, but we've kind of really seen it die off.
Absolutely. We'll keep an eye on that issue and, whether it impacts the polls. Certainly negotiations are ongoing. So I want to move to a new ABC News Ipsos poll released last week that shows the gender gap continuing to widen. Harris currently leads Trump by 13 points among women. What is playing into her widening the gap with women voters, and how worried should Republicans be?
I think a large part is she is obviously since Hillary Clinton, a very serious candidate, and potentially likely candidate to be president, slight favorite right now in our own model. And so that's inspiring, and it certainly is is a juice to her numbers among the female vote. It is something the Donald Trump campaign should be worried about. The numbers were a lot closer for them under Biden, and they're not close. They're, as you pointed out, they're not close for them under a Harris campaign. It's something they're aware of. It remains to be seen how they tackle it. Donald Trump just never has had a good message to women voters, specifically ones that turn out a lot. And I'm not necessarily sure he's going to crack the code over the next couple of months. But we'll see. We'll see. They're going for a security message that may or may not play out. But it appears, as you point out in that poll, it's not moving the numbers like it was under Biden.
So another demographic Harris is leading with by double digits, according to polls, is Generation Z voters or Gen Z voters. Democrats are campaigning very hard towards these younger voters, using social media and TikTok as a way to connect, and even inviting influencers to the DNC last month for the first time. We saw them all over in Chicago. So Scott, how key is the youth vote going to be this election cycle?
That's always everyone's favorite question. I think it'll be about as key as every other election. In other words, a lot of stories written about it, but this election is going to be won by, it's going to be won by some of the segments we talked about earlier: African American voters, Hispanic voters, union voters, women voters, and some of them will be Gen Z, but the vast majority of voters who vote are over the age of 40. Again, Gen Z, it was interesting a few months ago because it looked like Donald Trump was making some inroads. It looks like that those inroads have lessened, and the Democrats have retaken a double-digit lead. So that's interesting of itself. But as far as their impact on the whole electorate, still a relatively small segment.
Right. And we know that Gen Z voters, young voters, obviously very important, but older voters, historically, as you said, have been the most reliable voting bloc. So got to pay attention to the whole spectrum there. Moving here to Washington, lawmakers are coming back this week, and now Congress is facing down a deadline to prevent a government shutdown by the end of the month. Scott, what's at play here, and will lawmakers put politics aside and seal a deal prior to the November election? Seems like a pretty tall order to me.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've talked about a government shutdown or any sort of government gridlock. I guess it's September. The guessing game for Congress and whether or not they're going to shut down is going to be fun for September. I think it was Chip Roy who said earlier this week, he's like, voters don't really care. He didn't use those exact words. Don't really care whether the government shuts down. And I think that's probably relatively true. The people, Democratic, Republican, think Congress is not good at their job. Their approval ratings, in single digits, and so they're just hoping that the actual election comes and something changes. And it looks like we'll probably have a chamber switch at the Senate, and who knows where the House is at. So by and large, it's going to be a fight. It'll be some news. I don't know that it'll have any real effect on the presidential campaigns, and I don't know that voters are going to pay a whole lot of attention to it.
So on that note of flipping chambers and the presidential campaign, before I let you go, what is the latest decision desk forecasting?
Right now we have VP Harris at about 55%, so slight advantage, but really pure coin flip toss-up. Republicans, 70% chance of winning the Senate, and again, they've got a solid showing in West Virginia, Montana, although, Bernie Moreno is still lagging post-Labor Day in polling in Ohio, so the Democrats could upset there. And what I think is probably going to be the most exciting chamber to watch over the next 2 months, the House. Right now, slight advantage of the Republicans. But, right now the model thinks they're going to have 219 seats. You need 218 to control. This is going to, that's going to roller coaster over the next couple of months for sure.
I'm watching Montana in the Senate race. That seems to be a nail biter, but a number of them.
All that output coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A number of them to look out for. Scott Tranter, as always, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. Come back next week and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel.